and thank you for joining me on another episode of the Tech Exec Podcast, where I help you create teams worth leading because life's too short to lead mediocre teams. As always, I'm your host, Aviv Ben-Yosef, coach and consultant to tech execs, and today we're continuing our series of the 8-trait self-assessment I do with my clients. And after having talked last week about vision and its importance, today we're going to talk about instilling purpose. Instilling purpose is my definition for how we act on that vision, how we ensure that the vision is not just trapped in our own heads, but is shared with the rest of the team. So you, of course, cannot succeed as a leader without a proper vision. Having vision limited solely to yourself, not having shared it with the rest of the team, being the only one who understands why the vision looks like it looks, why the strategy is what it is, etc. If you're the only one who understands that, you might be able to make progress initially, but that is at the cost of being a micromanager, having to be involved in everything. So things will only move as fast as it is possible for you to keep all of those plates spinning. You will have around you people who do not value autonomy, which usually are not the best people available, and you will not notice when you are lacking in some extra perspective. You'll be more likely to make mistakes because if the rest of the team doesn't understand what you're doing, it will be harder for them to criticize it. If they're just following what you're telling them to do and don't understand the thinking behind it, how can they debug it? Instilling purpose is the next thing on our list. And instilling purpose for me means usually how I ask my clients to rate themselves. I'm asking, if I grab now 3-4 people from your team, from your organization, and I ask them to describe to me what's the current strategy, what are the current top 2 priorities, and what's the reasoning behind those being the top priorities. How many of those people will answer the same thing, and how aligned will that be with what you'll say? And this is actually a nice exercise that I sometimes do, even though rarely, because it scares a lot of people. But this is what you can ask yourself to understand whether you're instilling purpose well. Do you really believe that the people in your team understand where you're headed? Now, I hope that it is clear why this is critical. If you're the only one who has that, not only will you have all the micromanagement issues I just described, you will also not be free enough to do anything else. You will be sucked into all the tactical matters, meaning you cannot be a senior, high-altitude strategic leader for real because you're going to be involved in way too many things every day. We want you to be a real leader, meaning you have to move upstream. And therefore, your team has to learn how to operate more and more by itself, do the regular stuff, make more of the tiny decisions that we make throughout our day by understanding what the vision is. This is a crucial part for having enough context to make our decisions, to understand where we're headed, and again, to be able to be creative. If you followed along on last week's episode where I talked about how you can actually get the vision, whether you have to create it or be part of the team that's creating it, once you have that vision, to instill purpose, to make the people around you understand what's our goal and why it's critical and how we're going to get there, what we hope to achieve by doing that, etc., etc. Having all of that context, to do that, to instill that purpose, you need to break it down into a way that's understandable by them. So I'm not assuming that they're too stupid to understand the business, but I would not be surprised if you had to make some information more accessible to them because they might not have enough context about the market, about the company's finances, about what competitors are doing, about what you're expecting the regulation to change, whatever it is. So we need to make that accessible for them in the right context. So why is this critical? Explain why this vision, why these goals to achieve that vision, why the time frame was chosen. Describe to them this, not just being prescriptive as in, here are the objectives, here are the key results, you have 3 months, get to it, but add the extra depth. Why? What do we hope to achieve? Maybe you can talk together about different options that were considered. I keep saying that we don't want to be too prescriptive even when we have objectives to hand over to the team. If one of our objectives is launch a new product line, explain why. Explain why we're choosing a specific product line, or if you're giving the team, if you're empowering them to choose that, give them the tools to assess which one would be a good one. What sort of bets do we want? Describe the company's strategic vision, and so we can decide which bets to place, which makes sense. When you have a team that has purpose, when they understand things, what you get is the empowerment of having people be aligned. You know the thing about having one twig and snapping that, as opposed to having a bunch of twigs and seeing that you cannot snap that, because together they are much, much tougher. That is the case when they are really aligned. When you got like a bramble with a bunch of things going in a bunch of different directions, it will not be as durable. If we want to have a team that achieves things really fast, that knows what it's doing, that can deliver things in the right things, we have to give them this purpose, because otherwise, you know what they're going to do? I can tell you, I was there when I worked in teams where we did not have enough clarity. Maybe the execs had, but we did not have that. I, as a person who cares about the craft, who wants to be successful, who wants to achieve things, who wants to be productive, I got sucked into the path of least resistance for engineers. And that's just obsessing over tech and code and shiny stuff and whatever new technology I saw, or that new database, or whatever that was, to feel like I'm doing things that are unique, interesting, rewarding, challenging. But when you have a clear business goal and you understand why, and you can tackle it and you can move towards it, it is so much more rewarding, because you understand. You're not just following orders. You're not in a feature factory. You have purpose. You understand what's going to happen and why. And maybe it won't succeed, but at least you'll have enough understanding to realize what we tried and why that was the right bet, or why we thought it was the right bet. Now, add to that the fact that once you have that, you will not have to motivate your people. I will tell you right now, you cannot and should not make that part of your role. You need to find people who are motivated and give them the right challenges that keep them motivated, that they are excited to do regardless of your work as their leader, because you cannot create motivation, or at least it's just so hard, and extrinsic motivation doesn't usually last. You want to find people who are aligned on what we want to achieve, who understand the purpose, and when given that, they're just eager, just chomping at the bit, really just excited to get into that. Let me start doing it. I've got ideas. Let me try something. And when you have that, when you have that ability of translating the vision in your head into purpose for your team, so they understand what they need to do, so they're in line or in sync, then the magic starts happening, because you translate your vision into something that others are doing, creating this force multiplication effect, where every layer in the organization makes the next one even more autonomous, so we can achieve much more, even if your organization is not huge. By the point where you're managing a manager, not having purpose, not having the ability to instill purpose, can literally kill the team. Well, not literally, but you get me. It can really make the company grind to a halt, progress way too slow. So our takeaway today is, ensure, once you've completed last week's episode, once you have a vision, ensure that you're breaking it down in a way that is digestible for the rest of the team, so they can understand enough. And this is something that you have to maintain when we have new people as part of your onboarding. Every quarter, when we update our roadmap and our strategy and our direction, every time that happens, we have to make that conscious effort to translate between the executive level and the rest of the people. You have to do that because what you see is not what they see. They do not naturally have that context, even in small companies. So you have to work on doing that. And if you focus on that skill of yours, if you improve it, you'll see how amazing the results can be and how drastic a change it can make on a team very rapidly. It might also uncover people who are not aligned with what you want to achieve. And while that's never a happy thing, I would rather find out about that earlier rather than later, because I would rather have the right people in the team than try and ignore and look the other way while we still have people who are not the right fit. Okay? That's it for this week. Thank you for joining me. As always, do check out my newsletter. The link is in the show notes. I'll be here next week. Ciao.